Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep, and I mean deep, into Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's West Eastern Divan.
Ah, Goethe.
I think it's safe to say that a lot of us are fascinated by how he tries to build a bridge between Eastern and Western thought.
Right, definitely. Especially relevant these days, wouldn't you say?
Totally. And what gets me is that Goethe, this giant of European literature, was hugely influenced by Hafez, a 14th century Persian poet.
Quite a pairing.
It really is. I mean, how did these two from such different worlds come together to create a masterpiece? It's mind-blowing.
Well, it's important to remember that Goethe, born in 1749, wasn't just any writer. He was a true Renaissance man, a poet, playwright, scientist, philosopher.
A package.
Exactly. But what really sets him apart is his insatiable curiosity, this drive to explore beyond Europe. He was constantly looking beyond the familiar.
I love that. So we have Goethe, this major literary figure, and bam, Hafez's poetry hits him. And it's like a total game changer, right?
It was.
What was it about Hafez's work that resonated so deeply with him?
Hafez, you see, wrote about love, wine, spirituality. These were themes that really resonated with Goethe.
Okay, but European thought at that time was all about logic and reason, the Enlightenment and all that.
Exactly. And that's where Hafez comes in. His work offered a different perspective, one that was more in tune with feeling and intuition and the mystical. I mean, think about it. Hafez uses the metaphor of drunkenness to talk about spiritual enlightenment.
Whoa.
Right. And this really resonated with Goethe, who was also fascinated by those ideas.
Ah, so it's deeper than just liking the topics. Goethe is seeing a new way of using language.
Yeah.
Amazing. And this brings us to the West Eastern Divan.
Exactly.
But it wasn't just Goethe copying Hafez, was it?
Oh, absolutely not. This was a dialogue, a real exchange of ideas. Goethe was trying to understand and engage with Islamic and Persian traditions on their own terms.
Okay, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Now, remind me, the Divan, this isn't just one poem, right?
No, not at all. It's a collection of 12 books, each exploring a different facet of this East-West encounter. Love, wisdom, nature, politics, you name it. And it's all woven together with this really radical idea.
Go on.
That East and West aren't opposites. He argued that they're part of a single intellectual tradition.
Wow, that's a bold statement for that time.
Yeah.
I'm guessing not everyone was thrilled with this idea.
You're right. Some Western scholars saw it as a form of escapism, like he was running away from the problems of Europe by romanticizing the East.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what's even more interesting is that some Eastern scholars weren't happy either. They felt Goethe was still viewing the East through a very Western lens.
So is it even possible to truly see the world through another culture's eyes?
Right. It's a question we're still grappling with today.
Absolutely. But even with the criticism, people acknowledged that Goethe was doing something groundbreaking. I mean, engaging with Eastern thought in such a deep way. That was huge.
It really was.
So we've got appreciation, we've got criticism. How did Goethe try to actually bridge those cultural differences? That's what I'm really curious about.
Well, that's where his concept of Weltliteratur comes in, world literature. The idea that great works of literature, they can transcend national and cultural boundaries. They create this space for dialogue and understanding.
So it's about recognizing the universality of the human experience through these stories and ideas.
Exactly, finding the common threads that connect us.
I like that.
And the Divan was Goethe's attempt to put that concept into action.
But how did he do that? He didn't just write, "Let's all be friends," did he?
Not quite. He used a few different techniques. One of them was to incorporate Persian ghazals and Arabic qasidas into his writing, blending these poetic forms with his own style.
Hold on, I'll explain those forms.
Yeah.
A ghazal and, what was the other one?
A qasida.
Right, a qasida. What are those?
So a ghazal is a series of couplets. They all have the same rhyme and a recurring refrain at the end of the second line. And each couplet, it can stand on its own, but they're all linked thematically.
Interesting. And a qasida.
A qasida is a longer, more formal ode, usually praising someone or something. So think of them as these ancient forms of poetry, each with its own rules and structure.
Okay, so he's taking these forms that are totally foreign to Western literature and incorporating them into his own poetry.
Exactly. It was a bold move.
Very bold. Are there any specific examples of how he does this?
Oh, definitely. One of the most striking examples is the Book of Suleika. Goethe uses imagery and metaphors from Persian love poetry to express his own feelings for Marianne von Willemer.
Wait, so he's drawing inspiration from these Eastern poetic traditions, but he's also bringing in his own personal experiences.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
It is, and that's what makes the Divan so unique. It's not just a theoretical exercise, it's personal, it's emotional, it's a journey.
Okay, so we've got the concept, the criticism, the context. What about the actual content? What makes this Divan so significant?
Well, for one thing, the imagery. It's stunning. The language is so lyrical, and he's tackling these universal themes, love, loss, the search for meaning.
Right.
But the form is innovative, too, that blend of Eastern and Western styles.
I love that. He's not just talking about bridging cultures. He's doing it through the very structure of his work. It's like he's saying, look, these seemingly different traditions can not only exist together, but they can actually enhance each other.
Exactly. And I think that message is even more relevant today.
Definitely. So, did he actually succeed? Did Goethe really bridge those divides, or was he just an outsider looking in, like some critics say? I mean, it's a tough question.
It is, and I think it's a question every reader has to answer for themselves.
True.
But one thing's for sure. Goethe challenged the assumptions of his time. He opened up new ways of thinking about cross-cultural dialogue.
He was a pioneer. Okay, before we analyze specific parts, we need to unpack a crucial philosophical concept that's woven throughout the Divan. Wadat al-Wujud.
Ah, yes. That's a big one.
It is. It's key to understanding how Goethe tries to connect Eastern and Western thought. So let's dive into that next time.
So Wadat al-Wujud, it's often translated as the unity of being.
Okay.
It's a really complex idea, but to put it simply, it's the belief that all of existence, everything, comes from a single divine source. Like, imagine a tree. All those branches, they all come from the same trunk. Right?
Okay, I get it. So everything's interconnected, coming from the same source. That's pretty deep.
It is, and it really fascinated Goethe, especially as he was trying to figure out those differences between Eastern and Western thought.
Yeah, I can see how that would appeal to him. Instead of seeing them as opposites, Wadat al-Wujud kind of gives you this framework to see them as part of a bigger whole. But how did he actually incorporate this into the Divan? I mean, it's not like he wrote a philosophy book.
He didn't. He expressed it through poetry, imagery, metaphor.
The poet's tools.
Right. A great example of this is in the book of Hafez. Goethe is actually addressing Hafez directly, engaging in this kind of imaginary dialogue. And he uses Hafez's poetry as a starting point to explore ideas about divine love and the interconnectedness of all things.
So he's not just quoting Hafez, he's weaving those ideas into his own exploration of Wadat al-Wujud.
Exactly. And in doing so, he's attempting to bridge that gap between Eastern and Western thought, showing how this concept rooted in Islamic philosophy, it can actually resonate with a European worldview.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it. But, we were talking about those criticisms earlier. Some scholars said Goethe imposed his own Western lens on Eastern ideas. Do you think that applies here to his understanding of Wadat al-Wujud?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some scholars did argue that while Goethe was truly interested, he may have oversimplified or misinterpreted Wadat al-Wujud a little, to fit his own ideas. Because this concept in Islamic philosophy, it's really nuanced and complex.
So it's like he took this complex philosophical idea and kind of squeezed it into his existing understanding of the world, maybe missed some of the finer points.
That's one way of looking at it, but I think it's important to remember the historical context, too. Goethe was writing at a time when Europe had very limited understanding of Eastern thought. He was really a pioneer in trying to bridge that gap.
True. It's easy to judge looking back now, but we got to give him credit for trying something so new. Okay, so we've got Wadat al-Wujud as one way Goethe tried to bridge East and West. What other strategies did he use in the Divan?
Well, he uses all sorts of literary techniques. He incorporates imagery and symbolism from Eastern cultures.
Give me an example.
He often uses the image of the rose. And the rose has all this symbolic meaning in both Persian and European literature.
Right, okay. So he's using these shared symbols to connect cultures.
Yes. He's highlighting the common ground, those shared experiences that go beyond culture.
I'm starting to see how the Divan isn't just a bunch of poems. It's like this carefully crafted thing, woven together with all these philosophical ideas, literary techniques, personal experiences.
You got it. It's a multi-layered work that makes you think about the relationship between East and West, between self and other, the individual and the universal. All these big ideas.
Okay, now I'm really hooked. Can we look at a specific example? I want to see how it all comes together on the page.
Sure. Let's go back to the Book of Suleika. The one inspired by Goethe's love for Marianne von Wilmer.
Yep.
It's not just love poems, though, right? It's kind of like a mini version of the whole Divan project, where Goethe blends personal stuff with those Eastern influences.
Perfect. Let's do it.
There's this one poem that starts with, "The East belongs to God, the West to God."
Okay.
And he uses this image of the sun, rising in the East, setting in the West.
I see where you're going with this.
Right. It's a symbol of the interconnectedness of these two worlds.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. Using a simple image to convey this big philosophical idea.
And then he goes on to say, "If only the hearts of men were as open as this tent, then love and joy would dwell within it." He's making that connection, between the unity of being and the possibility of human connection.
That's beautiful. He's taking something abstract and philosophical and making it personal, human.
Exactly. And throughout the whole book of Suleika, he uses those images from Persian love poetry. The nightingale, the rose, all expressing the longing and the passion he feels for Marianne. That spiritual connection.
So he's drawing on Eastern traditions to express his own very personal emotions. That's so cool. This blend of the universal and the individual.
It really is. And through that fusion, he's trying to create a new kind of love poetry. One that goes beyond culture and speaks to that shared experience of love that we all feel.
Okay, I see the bigger picture now. But didn't some critics say Goethe was romanticizing the East? Does that apply here to how he portrays love in the Book of Suleika? Could he be like projecting Western ideals onto Eastern traditions?
That's a tricky one. It's true that Goethe was influenced by the Romantic movement, which often romanticized the East, seeing it as this place of mystery and exoticism. But I think it's more complicated than just saying he was romanticizing the East.
Help me understand.
Well, we have to remember, Goethe was genuinely fascinated by Eastern cultures. He really believed in this possibility of intercultural dialogue.
Yeah.
He wasn't just using the East for his own fantasies.
Right.
He was grappling with these real philosophical ideas and trying to make them part of his own worldview.
So it's more about like the sincerity of the effort, this groundbreaking thing he was trying to do, not just whether he got it right or wrong.
Exactly. He was breaking new ground. So, of course, there are going to be some stumbles along the way. But the important thing is he started a conversation. He opened up a space for dialogue.
I love that. Okay, so we've seen how Goethe uses wadat al-wujud, imagery, symbolism, his own experiences, to weave this tapestry that is the Divan. But we haven't talked about the idea of the Divan itself as a journey.
Oh, that's crucial. The Divan isn't just a bunch of poems sitting there.
Yeah.
It's this dynamic journey for Goethe himself and for the reader.
Tell me more about this Divan as a journey thing.
Well, just in terms of structure, the Divan is a series of books. Each one represents a different stage of this intercultural exploration, but it's also a journey in a more metaphorical sense.
How so?
Well, Goethe saw the Divan as a way to discover himself, to grow and challenge his own beliefs. And he invites the reader to come along on that journey.
So we're like traveling with him as he explores these new intellectual and emotional worlds.
Yes. And along the way, there are challenges. There are setbacks. There are moments of doubt and moments of profound insight. It's a journey that requires us to be open-minded and question what we think we know and embrace the unknown.
That's a powerful way to look at the Divan. It's not passive, it's something you experience.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this book relevant today. It speaks to this very human desire to explore, to connect, to go beyond our limitations.
Okay, now I really want to keep exploring the Divan and see where it leads. Before we jump into specific sections, were there any parts you found especially moving or thought-provoking?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The Book of Illusions is really powerful, I think. It's where Goethe reflects on time and aging and loss.
Those big questions high.
Exactly. And what's so cool is he doesn't shy away from those tougher aspects of life. He embraces them, explores them, and eventually finds acceptance.
That's incredible. Can't wait to read it. But for now, let's take a quick break and then come back and explore some of those poems that really bring these ideas to life. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into some actual poems from the Divan. See how all those ideas we talked about, the Weltliteratur, wadat al-wujud, all the Eastern poetic forms, how it all comes together in the text itself.
Sounds good to me.
We were just talking about the Book of Illusions before the break, where Goethe explores those big existential questions. Time, aging, loss. It feels like we're getting a window into Goethe's mind,
It really does.
Is there a particular poem that stands out for you from this section, something that really captures that feeling?
Yeah. There's one that begins with, "Not in the sky, not in the sea, no secure place has been found for your restless soul." It really gets at this sense of searching, this yearning, Like we're reaching for something beyond the limits of, our earthly existence.
Wow, that's so powerful. It's like he's saying we're all kind of wired to be restless, But doesn't that contradict the whole idea of wadata wujud?
Interesting point.
If everything is ultimately one, why would our souls be restless? It seems like a conflict.
You're right. That is a great question. And it's what makes the Divan so fascinating. Goethe isn't giving us a simple answer. He's wrestling with these questions himself, embracing those paradoxes and contradictions.
Oh. So it's not about the answers, it's about the journey, the exploration itself.
Exactly.
Makes sense. But you know what else is interesting? Even when he's writing about aging and loss, those heavy themes, there's still this sense of beauty and wonder. It's not all depressing.
You picked up on that too. It's definitely there.
Yeah.
There's one poem where he compares life to a tapestry. It's being woven and unwoven constantly. He says, "We are but threads in the hands of fate, woven into the tapestry of time." I mean, there's a sense of acceptance there, maybe even joy, in recognizing our place within this larger order of things.
I love that image. It makes me think maybe that restlessness we were talking about, maybe it's not about trying to escape our limits, but about trying to connect more deeply within that larger whole, like finding our place in the tapestry.
I think you're right. Goethe is not saying we should just give up. It's more like by embracing our place, by accepting it, we find peace.
That's a really powerful message, especially when we think about those themes of aging and loss. Okay, so we've explored Book of Illusions. Are there any other sections you'd recommend checking out? Any poems that come to mind?
Of course. We got to talk about the Book of Seleucus some more, one of the most popular parts of the Divan. It really showcases how good Goethe was at blending those personal feelings with Eastern forms of poetry.
Right, and that's where those images of the nightingale and the rose come in, right?
Yeah, exactly. The nightingale representing the lover, pouring out his heart. The rose, the beloved. So beautiful, but unattainable. It's this classic motif in Persian poetry, and Goethe uses it so well in the Book of Seleucus.
But, we were talking about those criticisms. Some say he's just appropriating Eastern traditions without understanding them. Does that apply here?
I think what separates Goethe is how deeply he engages with those traditions. It wasn't just surface level for him. He was wrestling with the philosophy, the spirituality behind these forms.
Give me an example. How did he do that?
Well, take the ghazal form, for example. Remember, it's a series of couplets with the same rhyme and that refrain at the end of the second line.
Right.
Each couplet is like its own little world, but they're all tied together. There's this sense of longing, this reaching for something bigger. And I think that reflects how Goethe understood wadata wujud. It's like every experience, every moment is a reflection of that larger unity.
So he's not just borrowing the form. He's using it to express a much deeper idea.
Exactly. That's why the Book of Seleucus is so powerful. It's this amazing mix of personal emotion, Eastern poetic forms, and profound insights.
Makes me want to reread those poems with a fresh perspective. But before we wrap things up, one last thought. We've seen how Goethe tried to connect East and West through the Divan. What do you think his legacy is today? How has his work shaped how we view intercultural dialogue now?
That's a big question, but I think it's fair to say he was a real trailblazer. He showed us that it's possible to engage with different cultures, to find common ground, and to make something new and beautiful from that exchange.
I agree. And even if, from our modern perspective, he didn't always get it right, the fact that he's asking these questions, challenging those assumptions, that's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. He created this opening for conversation, for dialogue. That's something to be celebrated.
And something we need now more than ever, don't you think? So to wrap up our deep dive into the West Eastern Divan, I think the takeaway is this. Goethe's work inspires us to be curious about the world, to engage with other cultures, to look for those connections that go beyond boundaries.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And maybe, just maybe, if we follow Goethe's lead, we can all help build those bridges of understanding, create a more interconnected and harmonious world.
Now that's a thought to leave you with. Thanks for joining us on this journey into Goethe's West Eastern Divan. Hope you enjoyed it.